Okay, now today is chapter 5 of the book of First Timothy we're going to get into today. We're almost done with First Timothy. This chapter is actually, you could call this the chapter on welfare, basically. How did the saints deal with the poor in and among the church? So verse 1, Paul says, "Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren. The elder women as mothers, the youngers as sisters, with all purity." So verse 1 and 2 is one sentence, basically. And realize it's saying we should treat people as family. Now, not a modern family, but we should treat them as like legit family. Like, I love you, we work together, not this modern dysfunctional family stuff we see today, but more of treat each other with great respect. Family means something. And if we treat each other as brothers and sisters, as family, we will show great respect and value to people, which will help us to have a better church, better organization. Verse 3, Paul says, "Honor widows that are widows indeed." Wayment, in his book, The New Testament, said, "The word honor implies both honor and respect, as well as offering financial assistance." So we can use that word honor in several different ways when we look at the original writings in Greek. The instructions to care for widows may have been based on teachings in Deuteronomy 24. So the law of Moses, back in the Old Testament, gave guidelines and rules about helping the poor, helping those who struggle and can't help themselves. So this is talking about widows. So these are women who have lost their husbands. Now let's talk about this for a second, okay? Because usually when we think of widows in our modern day, we think of widows as older women. They're retired, they're aged, they're weak, they've lost a lot of muscle mass, they can't function well, they have health problems, other things like that, and we need to take care of these old women. That's, I think, what most people think of today. And I think that's still valid to look at that point of view. But we have to understand, in Paul's day and age, marriage was different, okay? Women were viewed as property of men. So a woman, when she's married, she's the property of her husband. Her husband is the executor of the entire estate. If she has a son, then her and her oldest son become co-executors of the estate in the event of her husband dying. But if she doesn't have a son, then she's out. She can't go buy stuff. She can't sign contracts. She can't do much on her own. She has to have a man there because of how society was built up in that day and age. Their culture was women can't do anything themselves. Men have to do it. So a woman, even if she has, especially if she has no kids, she's out. Okay. The problem is if she's a woman with no husband and has kids, the men realize she's been with a man before, so she's considered damaged goods. So we will reject her and kick her out. So what Paul is saying is, no, we need to take care of these women. Society has put these women in a bad spot where the only way that women can actually move forward in life is with a man. And if the man goes away, then basically there's kind of this loophole in society that just dooms women to problems. And so Paul is saying we need to take care of these people. We need to realize that sometimes our culture creates loopholes that people fall into that negatively impact their life. And when that happens, we still need to be taking care of these people. We still need to be working with helping them out. That's what he's getting at here. Now, with this concept of how they thought back then, let's look at verse 4, because this might make a little bit more sense. "But if any widow have children or nephews mean boys, let them learn first to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God." So this is what's interesting, is because in that day and age, again, when a married woman's husband dies, she and her son, her oldest son, because the oldest son gets the birthright, he gets the double portion, the mother and the oldest son run the household in a co-branded way. Basically, the son kind of takes dominance, but the mother co-brands with the son in that situation. If she doesn't have some, maybe she might have a nephew that then she would work with in dealing with that. So a woman always needs to find some man to connect with. Otherwise, it just goes bad because of how the society and culture was set up back then. And so what he's talking about here is he's not saying, if you have children, the children need to take care of you. What he's saying here is these women need to show piety to the men in their life, to look at the greater family situation. And we need to take pity on these women and work with them and help them. So hopefully you start to see a little bit more of what Paul is really trying to get across to Timothy here. Verse 5 is going to continue on. He says, "Now she that is a widow indeed, and desolate, trusteth in God, and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day." If a widow is desolate, she has no children. Which means when her husband dies, basically the assets go away. The family kind of absolves it up and she can be kicked to the curb. This is, again, a culture that has negative consequences for women. Paul is still saying we need to find those people that get stuck in these cultural traps in our society, and let's help them out and get out of that. What are some of the cultural traps in today's society that we sometimes fall into? That could be things where we need to look at it and go, how can we overcome the problems of current policy? Oftentimes when laws are put in place, they're very specific, and they sometimes create these little loopholes that people fall into that cause negative issues. Let's help these people. It doesn't matter what the culture says. Let's learn to help people out, especially if they are disadvantaged because of policy, basically. Verse 6, "But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth." Now, verse 6 is getting more into the idea of if a woman, she is a widow, so her husband is dead, but she lives in pleasure, meaning probably getting into more like prostitution and other things like that. She's dead inside while she's still technically alive. That's what he's getting at here. So verse 7, "And these things give in charge that they may be blameless." So this is, again, an admonition from Paul to Timothy saying, "Guy, look at this, Timothy. Take this into account, okay? We need to help women out. We need to help them to have a better life. We need to make sure that they don't fall through the cracks, that we can help people, not just because society says, oh, well, you're out because you're this way. You're a minority. You're out just because you're a minority." No. We are all children of God. We need to be treating each other equally and working with each other. So hopefully that'll help you to see a little bit more of what Paul is really getting at in this. Verse 8, he continues on and says, "But if any provide not for his own." Now notice in here, provide not for his own. He's talking about men now. Men are the providers of the family. They're the ones that own the assets and control everything. And it is the man's job, the husband/father, their job to take care of the needs of the rest of the family. Okay? And if they're not providing for their own, and especially for his own house, now that means his wife, his children, grandchildren, servants in his house as well, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. So a man who doesn't take care of the people he has stewardship for is worse than a non-member, is basically what they're getting at there. They're worse than a heathen because their responsibility is to take care of their family, their immediate and extended family, as well as the servants that are part of their family also. They all need to be taken care of. Verse 9, "Let not a widow be taken into the number under 60 years old, having been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works, if she have brought up children, if she have lodged strangers, if she have washed the saints' feet, if she have relieved the afflicted, if she have diligently followed every good work." Now, verse 9 and 10, again, that's one big sentence. Let's break this down a little bit more, okay? In the New Testament Study Manual, it says the reference in 1 Timothy 5:9 to widows being taken into the number may mean that certain widows were numbered among those receiving welfare assistance from the church. So these are women who do not have a husband, and so the church as a collective whole is helping to provide resources for these women so they're not left destitute, because society kicks them out. You're a woman without connection to a man, you're out of here. We don't care about you anymore. You're just a bad mark on society. You have no value. And what the church is saying is, no, these women have value. We need to be taking care of them. Help these women out. Society has made it so that they're kicked to the curb. We're going to reject society's ideas and do what God wants, which is help people out. That's what they're talking about here. So a woman who is doing her best, she is, if she's brought up her children, she's lodged strangers, meaning she's being hospitable. Stranger needs help, yes, come in. We'll feed you and give you a bed to sleep on, and you can lodge here. They didn't have necessarily hotels like we have today. So lodging with people, people opened up their homes and accepted strangers in. Washing the saints' feet. Now, this is a ritual that Jesus taught his apostles at the Last Supper. Is the idea of servitude, washing the feet. It's an ordinance. Even in the LDS Church, apostles, from what I understand, still use this today. But this is the idea, again, of charity, giving charity. If this woman is giving charity, if she's relieved the afflicted, if she has done things to strive to be good, if she's striving to keep the commandments of God, she's not trying to just get welfare, to be lazy. She's trying to follow Christ. The church should help her, not penalize her. The church should support her. Even if she has no man, the church, in a way, becomes that kind of a default man to help her in her life because of the laws at the time. That's what they're getting at here. Verse 11, but the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry. So in this verse, there's a little bit of a difference in this one we want to look at, okay, in verse 11. The widows were required to remain celibate and unmarried in order to remain under church care. So here's part of the rules of the culture back then, okay? So a woman is to not ever have any sex, to stay a virgin until she gets married. When she's married, she can have sex. The main part of sex is childbearing. Part of it was, intimacy with you and your partner, although we hear more about it on the men's side than the woman's side being taken care of. That's what it is. So when a husband dies, she's still married to that husband, meaning that husband is the only man she can have sex with. So that means she's celibate, and she should remain celibate. But Paul is saying here there's a problem that happens sometimes when a woman gets married and her husband dies shortly thereafter. So she's still young. She wants to have kids, but she's still married to a dead man. That's where problems will happen for them, because now they start to get wanton and start to want to do their own thing and start getting out away from the rules and ideas. And that's when they wax wanton. So the ideas of like prostitution and other things come in because society says they can't. Women couldn't. Women were not allowed to start the divorce process. They couldn't file for divorce and get out on their own. They could get the paperwork, but their husband had to sign it. If the husband didn't sign it, there was no divorce. It was all up to the husband whether the wife got a divorce or not. And so if the husband's dead, then how do you get out of that? So it turns into a problem. And most of the time these women were young and they didn't have kids. So they didn't have a family, but yet they've been married, which means they are not technically, they have slept with a man. So other men don't want a previously married woman, especially one who's technically still married. So it turns into this problem. And so he's saying that we need to be careful with these situations and help them out. So verse 12, having damnation because they have cast off their first faith. So again, these are women that are going, you know what, I'm going to just break the rules. I'm going to break the church customs and the rules, and I'm going to go do what I want. And that's what he's warning against there. Verse 13, and withal they learned to be idle, wandering about from house to house, not only idle, but tattlers also and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. So these, again, talking about these young brides that are now widows. Society kind of puts them in that little loophole that says basically you're kind of out. You have no kids, but you can't really get married. There's, so your life is, you're alive, but you can't do anything. Your life is like in a stasis and you can't do anything. So what do? They wander around. They, when their chores are done at their father's home, which is usually where they go back to, they just start wandering around. None of the other men want to deal with them because they've been previously married, but they don't have kids, so they don't have a family heritage to move on with. And then they get careless and they relax their faith and get into the world and want to do these other things that violate the commandments of God that they had. And so that's the problem that they're getting into. So verse 14, I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some are already turned aside after Satan. Paul's opinion is, if you're a young bride and you become a widow, we don't want you to go down this nasty, horrible path. We understand the culture is you're stuck. Okay, now think of Tamar. Let me give an example of this. Think of Tamar from the Old Testament. Here she is, okay, she is the daughter-in-law of Judah's sons, okay. Judah has 3 sons, and so Judah finds her as the daughter-in-law for his oldest son. His oldest son dies. The scriptures tell us in Genesis that God saw that his oldest son, Selah, I believe his name was wicked and kills him. He's out. So now Tamar is a widow and a young widow. So the law of Moses said there was this principle called levirate marriage. And I believe a big part of levirate marriage was actually to benefit women and help them out. Because now, again, Tamar is a widow without children. Her life is kind of in a never-ending stasis at this point because that's what it is. So to solve this, the law of Moses said what will happen is Tamar will become the wife of the next son. So now Judah's second son takes Tamar as a wife. This is all in Genesis. You can go look this up. This is levirate marriage. Now the levirate marriage law is we need someone to carry on the heritage of the older brother. So the first son that Tamar and her second husband have is in behalf of the older brother. So he will inherit the older brother's wealth. The older brother will get the double portion from Judah, and so his oldest will get the double portion from his assets as well. And then any sons and after the first son is Tamar and her second husband's children. So that's how levirate marriage works. Well, in this situation with Tamar, what happens is the second son decides, I hate this rule. I'm not going to follow it. And so I'm going to sleep with my wife, but I'm not going to get her pregnant. In fact, it's really crazy. This is a wild story. And trust me, if you want to go look this up in Genesis, you can. It actually says in the King James Version Bible that he spat it out on the ground, meaning he would have sex with his wife, but before he hit climax, he would pull out and ejaculate outside of his wife. Get it out on the ground where it can't get her pregnant. So he was enjoying the benefits of being married, but not fulfilling the laws around marriage. Now for Tamar, this is a horrible problem because if she has a son, she has established somewhat of a mother house within the house of Judah that she could continue on even without a husband. But if her husband is denying her the right to get pregnant, then he is denying her these opportunities to help further establish her status as a woman. And so this is bad for Tamar. But she can't do anything about it because it's her husband pulling out, basically, before she can get pregnant, before he ejaculates, basically. So this son, I believe his name was Onan, God says, nope, you're wrong. This is evil. Psh, we're going to kill you and out. So now Tamar goes to the third son. The third son is too young to get married. So Judah says, go back to your dad's house and live there until my third son is old enough, and then I'll come get you. You can be his wife. And so she's like, okay, whatever. She's probably mid-20s around this time frame. Though this young man is probably 8 to 12 years old at this point, so it's going to be a little while. So Tamar goes back. Basically, she's still married to a son of Judah. So she can't do anything, but she's a widow to two husbands, so she has to wear the widow's clothing. So everybody knows she's a widow, so none of the men try to hit on her. They can't ask for her hand in marriage, so she's stuck. She has no kids, she has no real husband, but she's betrothed to a guy that's half her age. She's stuck. There's nothing she can do. She can't progress at all in her life. Well, Judah eventually causes problems, and you can go read the rest of the story to understand it. She decides to change the status quo, and Judah acknowledges that she was right in what she did, that Judah was wrong in keeping her as a childless woman. And you can go read the rest of the story to get into that. It's really pretty fascinating. But this is the problem, and Paul's looking at this going, okay, these women are in a bad spot. And he's saying that I would prefer, I know the society says that these women should not get married, but I would prefer that they do remarry instead of fall in. It's better that they remarry and break this cultural custom than it is that they fall into sin and lose their soul. So this is contrasting and comparing. Is culture more important or doctrine more important? Do you see that? This is a comparison that Paul is making in this part. And he's saying the doctrine should supersede the culture. Sometimes we limit ourselves, even in our own religions, because we believe that there are certain things that are doctrinal, but actually they're just culture. And they're not doctrine. And we need to think about what is the doctrine, and let's follow the doctrine and not. Culture can come and go. If it's cultural, it can be changed. If it's doctrine, it doesn't change. And that's what he's getting at here, is we need to help these women because this is a bad situation that our culture is putting them in. Let's change this. So verse 16, if any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. So again, help these people out. Society has put them in a bad spot. Let's help these people out. The doctrine is charity, not following political laws and cultural norms. Let's have charity. Let's have guidance. Let's work with people, okay? Verse 17, let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and doctrine. So this is talking about the men with the priesthood who are administering the church, who are fulfilling their responsibilities. I think in general, we could generalize this out to say anybody with a church calling, if you should be counted worthy of double honor if you are laboring in word and doctrine, if you are teaching it, if you are magnifying your calling, if you're working to and striving to do what you need to do, that's good. Keep doing that. We should praise and honor those people. Verse 18, for the scripture saith, so this is Paul now bringing in some scriptural teachings, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the laborer is worthy of his reward. Now this is a phrase, I don't know, I'm trying to think where the laborer is worthy of his reward. That I believe is coming from Deuteronomy, that I'm not sure where that one's coming from, actually. I don't see where we have a scripture where that one shows up. So I'm not sure where that one is. Thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, Deuteronomy 25 is probably where that one is. So is this idea that if your ox gets out and it tramples all over your corn and ruins the corn, a lot of times it's eating the corn, it's chewing it up, you're going to put a muzzle on that ox to prevent it from doing that again. And so what they're saying here is, look, if they're doing good work, stop inhibiting them. If they're doing what should be done, if they're doing what's right, stop blocking them, stop getting in the way. Let's help people. The rules are important. We follow the doctrine, but sometimes how doctrine's applied and the culture gets in the way of really following the doctrine. If that ever happens, the doctrine is what we should be following. That's what he's getting at here. And so we need to be cautious and careful with how we look at that. Yes, we have rules. Yes, rules are important. But if the rules limit our ability to follow the doctrine, maybe the rules are wrong. That's something we need to consider about. Now, that doesn't mean because you believe that the teachings of the church are wrong that you can be self-righteous and take this into your own hands and try to preach against the church or whatever. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is there's a concept here for us to learn. Okay, we should be honoring our leaders, but sometimes we need to acknowledge that even as leaders, that maybe the doctrine is more important than the rule. And let's look at those things. Okay. Now, verse 19, he says, against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. So again, if somebody comes to you complaining about a church leader, okay. But we shouldn't really act on it unless there's multiple witnesses of this, because it could just be that person's opinion. We need multiple witnesses to confirm that that is actually behavior that that person is doing wrong. That's an important thing. Now, verse 20, he says, them that sin rebuke before all, and that others also may fear. So verse 20, Paul is reminding Timothy that, and this sounds kind of bad, but rebuking people in public for their sins, we see that as a very shameful thing to do. But what he's saying is we need to use them as an example for others. Don't go down this path. Learn from them is what he's really getting at here, basically. So they go, oh, they got punished for doing that. I don't want to go down that path. It doesn't mean we have to be like, hey, brother so-and-so and our board or our church congregation did this and it was bad, and so we're being punished. We don't need to make it a public spectacle, but there is value in helping people learn from the mistakes of others. And so that's what he's getting at here. Verse 21, he says, I charge thee, so Paul charging Timothy, so this is a specific part for Timothy, before God and the Lord Jesus Christ and the elect angels. So he is putting like a triple dog dare type idea on Timothy right here. He's saying this is before all these witnesses. So he labels God, Jesus as a witness, and the elect angels, which we don't know how many, because that's plural, how many he mentions, but that's more than 3 witnesses, that thou observe these things without preferring one before another, doing nothing by partiality. So he's helping him. Basically, he's talking about prejudice. When he talks about partiality, I need you, Timothy, to follow these commandments and do them without your own prejudice and biases getting in the way. Be objective in your determinations and what you're doing. So that's what he's saying here. And he's decreeing that God knows I'm saying this to you, Jesus knows I'm saying this to you, and the elect angels know I'm saying this to you. So you have no excuse if you do not follow this, basically. Verse 22, he says, lay hands suddenly on no man, neither be partaker of another man's sins, keep thyself pure. The New Testament Study Manual brings up a comment on this, saying this idea of lay hands suddenly on no man, this meant that men were not to be ordained without proper preparation. That preparation included ensuring that the one to be ordained was spiritually mature and worthy, and seeking the Lord's guidance. So this wasn't, not try to like beat people up or like imprison people rashly, although you could look at that. I mean, it's still a good idea to follow that. But what the New Testament Study Manual is saying is Paul is warning Timothy, don't be in a hurry to put people in positions until you have properly vetted them. Don't get too hasty about, oh, we got a position we need to fill. Let's find a body and stick into that position. Let's make sure that these are people who are really working on following God and can do a good job at this. That's what we need to be working on. So some very good leadership principles and ideas for us as well. Verse 23, drink no longer water, but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake and thine often infirmities. Verse 23 is kind of an interesting one. Again, if you look at it from a modern perspective, oh, we should stop using water and drink wine more often now because Paul said so. If you believe in the literalism of the Bible, then technically you should become an alcoholic because of that verse. But what he's saying is you have to understand, okay, water back then was not purified like it is today. Like there were bacteria, there were viruses, there's amoebas, there's all kinds of stuff. You're drinking in the same river that cows are drinking in, that people are washing their clothes in, that people are urinating in and bathing in. You had one source of water and you just do the best you could. But it was causing apparently problems for Timothy. He had gut problems. Today we'd call that the microbiome. He had microbiome issues. Because of that, maybe he got like a tapeworm or something. Maybe he got some kind of a stomach bug from it, an amoeba type thing or something that his immune system was reacting to, and it was causing him lots of problems. And so Paul's like, look, use some wine for your stomach's sake. The alcohol can clean you out a little bit, can help get rid of some of that stuff. You can get help. They kind of believed that wine had medicinal properties. And there is some truth to that, actually. There's some research, even recent research, that shows that drinking a glass of wine, there are vitamins, there are good, healthy components of wine because of the fruit, like grape juice. If you get it from grapes, there are things that will still be helpful to you that's in that. It's not the alcohol that's the healthy part, it's the other vitamins from the grape. So you can get the same benefit from grape juice as you could from alcohol as far as health benefits. But that's kind of what he's saying is like, look, just use a little wine because that's what we have. It is sterilized because of the alcohol, so you don't get all the bugs and germs and stuff, and that will help you. Now, they didn't have germ theory back then. That was Louis Pasteur that did that so long. He was way after Paul's time by almost I think Louis Pasteur was late 1700s, early 1800s time frame. So almost 2,000 years after Paul. But again, giving some advice based on what they believed as nutrition back then and health to Timothy. Verse 24, some men's sins are open beforehand, going before to judgment, and some men they follow after. So again, some people, it's clear what their sin is, and other people will follow them because of that. Likewise, verse 25, also the good works of some are manifest beforehand, and they that are otherwise cannot be hid. So some people, you can see their good works. Some people, you can see their wickedness. And that can affect other people, is what he's getting at there. So some really interesting concepts and ideas that Paul brings up in that letter. Let's jump to the next chapter, which is our final chapter for the book of 1 Timothy, and we'll discuss that then.